Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's Titan Leader Talk. I'm Madison Sheehan with the Titan Leader team. We're excited for tonight's event. We've got a great coach with us, a coach that I've personally played for and worked with for about 3 or 4 years now. And I'm really excited to be able to talk to her, Coach Kim Daly-Badgley from the Ohio State University Strength and Conditioning Programs. Really just an exceptional coach all around. She's got a great story to tell us today, as well as how we can lead in and out of the weight room as athletes as well as coaches. I know that not every team has the luxury of having a strength and conditioning program like we do at the D1 level, but definitely a lot of life lessons that you can take back to implementing in your weight room when you have your athletes in the weight room, as well as just any time you're out with your team, working with your teams. And for more leadership content, you can download the Titan Leader app, as well as watch this later. If you're watching live with us right now, go ahead and tweet your questions to the Titan Leader Talks chat, and we will field those questions to Coach D here later. So without further ado, Coach Kim Daly-Badgley from the Ohio State Strength and Conditioning.
Thanks, Sheehan. I'm really excited to be with you this evening and talk a little bit about my journey at Ohio State, the teams that I've worked with, the leaders that have come to me, and the leaders that their teams have helped shape. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Coach. So to get started, throw a quote up there. If you can't outplay them, outwork them. And I think after talking to Coach D, you're really going to learn that's a lot of what she teaches. And you always want to be the hardest working person in Coach D's weight room from personal experience. You definitely don't ever want to be last when you're around her. So to get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you got to where you are. You're one of the first women in strength and conditioning. You've led teams to exceptional levels. So just tell us a little bit about who you're working with and what you're doing.
Awesome. I'm actually from a little town in Northwest Ohio called Elida. If you've ever seen the movie Remember the Titans, that's how I grew up. My dad is actually in the Ohio High School Football Coaches Hall of Fame. I was the oldest. I was the firstborn, and nobody told my dad I was a girl. So I was at all football practices, weight room, all of those things. When I went to college, I actually thought I wanted to be an athletic trainer, but I ended up at the University of Arizona, and the head strength coach there was a female. She was the only female Division I football playing head strength coach in the country at that time. So I was super fortunate to work under her. As a fluke, I needed a work-study job, and they had a work-study job in the varsity weight room. And so it was a great opportunity to get my schooling paid for and get an amazing education from her. Once I finished up at the University of Arizona, I had a degree in exercise sports science and a minor in psychology. Little did I know how much that psychology minor was going to come into play into what I do. It's actually just as important as the exercise sports science degree itself. I came back to Ohio, I moved to Columbus, was actually working at the YWCA downtown and was putting on a clinic, and brought in my former boss, Meg Stone, to speak for me. And my dad had taken her over to the Woody Hayes football facility. They ran into the football strength coach. He said, "Hey, I'm looking for a female assistant. Do you know anybody?" That was 1992. So I was the first female strength coach at Ohio State. And at that time, I was only the third strength coach at Ohio State. There were 2 male strength coaches. They took care of football and men's basketball, and then everybody else fell to me. So it was kind of baptism by fire. The first year I started was the year that women's basketball played for the national championship, and Katie Smith was a freshman. So it was not a bad way to start a career. So since that time, I've basically worked with everybody except football, men's basketball, pistol, rifle, and fencing. So I've kind of run the gamut.
And what teams are you working with right now?
Currently, I have dance, rowing, women's golf, and synchronized swimming.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to coach with all of those different team cultures and kind of the attitude each one of them brings in the weight room. I know as a rower, we probably brought a very different attitude as well as training style and things like that than say the dance team did. A lot of credibility across all teams, but what's it like to work with those different cultures, different head coaches, and kind of what was that like?
I'm very fortunate that the head coaches of my sports and I are on the same page. My sports are very accomplished. Let's see, rowing's won national championships, dance has won national championships, synchronized swimming's won national championships, and women's golf, we are just waiting on the opportunity to win a national championship. So they're all on the same page as this is the goal. We want to win a national championship. We want to represent Ohio State on the national stage. If that's not something that's going to happen for us, we're definitely winning Big Tens and making a statement with that. So I'm very fortunate, like I said, that the head coaches and I are on the same page, because it makes it easier for the athletes to flow from practice into the weight room, because the expectation is one of, we're going to do whatever it takes to win. What that looks like for rowing is going to look very different from what it looks like for women's golf. Just because of the mental demands on rowing are so great. The mental demands on women's golf are different. It's more about the game, and you're talking about if they're just playing 18, it's a 4-hour round. If they're playing 36 holes, you're looking at playing golf for 8.5 hours in a day. And that's with going out to the course early, practicing, finishing your round, and then practicing again whatever didn't go well during the round. So looking at those things, you look at also competition. Rowing and synchronized swimmers are very similar in the fact that you only have 6 or 7 competitions the entire year. You train the whole year, but it's only for 6 or 7 competitions. That's it. Dance, they have 1 competition. Their national championship is in January, and then that's it. The rest of the time, they're entertaining at football games, basketball games, and that type of thing.
Yeah. So how did you build your own culture in your weight room? Like, I think you can talk to any rower, synchronized swimmer, whoever it was. When you walked in the weight room, there was a tone that was set no matter what. So how can a coach set that tone, and what did that look like for you?
Well, when I started, I was 24 years old. Most of my athletes didn't know that. When working with men's hockey, I was maybe only a year to 2 years older than they were, but that was something that they had to guess at. They didn't know. When I walked in the room, I own the room. I always own the room. And as you know, if somebody's talking while I'm talking, I'll shut everything down and say, I'm sorry, you've forgotten. When I'm present, it's all about me. And it's all about me and what I can do for you to help you achieve your goals. So I think the biggest thing is you walk in with confidence and you let them know that you're there to help them achieve their goals. Now, at any time, if those goals change, you got to let me know, and then I will alter my approach to how we're doing business. But if you want to win, I'm going to push. And I'm going to push because mentally, you're going to give up before your body gives up. And that's where I step in to help you understand that your boundaries are so much farther than you actually think they are.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue into kind of the biggest part of our conversation that I think we should have is, mental toughness is huge in a weight room. It's huge in any sport. Can you talk a little bit to that?
There's a couple quotes. One quote I really like is, you speak to yourself from a place of strength. You listen to yourself from a place of weakness. Well, what does that mean? Everybody's like, well, that doesn't make sense. It absolutely does. When things are going well, what are we telling ourselves? You've got this, you can push through, you can, but if the wheels start to come off and things start to, hurt and bother us, you're like, oh, I can't do this. I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. You crack open that door and the next thing you know, it flies open with negative self-talk. And another thing quote that I like to use is, the only voice that will keep you from achieving your goals is your own. You're in charge of the whole thing. And how are you talking to yourself? And this generation, and I've got them in right now just because I'm in a household full of people, does not like to listen to their own self-talk, or they're afraid of it. Anytime you look at a young person, they've got earbuds in. It doesn't matter if they're walking across campus, if they're, studying, if they're going to sleep, they've always got some type of noise going into them instead of allowing themselves that quietness of a moment where you have that running dialogue in your head, positive, negative, or otherwise, it's always there. So if you don't develop that, when you get into competition and things start to go wrong, like you're a cross country runner or you're a swimmer, it's you and your sport. And if it's not going well, you've got to be able to talk yourself through it to get to the other side of it. And it's like anything else, it's a tool, and you have to develop that tool. You can't just wait for things to get difficult and then think that you're able to kick it into high gear. So anytime that there's any type of conditioning that I'm rolling out, my athletes know, don't ask me if you can wear your ear pods, because I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I can vividly remember doing some of our workouts, and that was never an option. And we were always going to be out doing our best and working hard as we possibly could as a unit, as a team, and kind of branching off of the mental toughness concept. When I think about training mental toughness, I go back to like my novice rowing year, and you've coached the novice rowing program in the weight room quite often. As a high school coach, I think that's got a lot of parallels to the novice program, because these are athletes that are stepping into the Division I role that might not necessarily have actually been in the Division I role without the novice program as an option. For those of you who don't know what a novice rowing program is, it's kind of a walk-on program for colleges to have young rowers join their teams and develop themselves and become a really great rower. And that opportunity is at Ohio State. So how do you, if you're a young coach and you've got some athletes that don't really know what mental toughness is, and they're just kind of stepping in this role of wanting to be an elite athlete, what do you have to say to them?
You just have to educate them on what that actually is and ask the questions. How often during the day do you have your ear pods in? How are your earbuds in all the time? Not only does it limit your own self-talk, but it limits other people interacting with you, because it gives the I'm closed sign, So looking at that and saying, okay, have you ever had an opportunity to listen to your own voice? Has there ever been an instance that's come up, whether it's an exam, you're talking about somebody that may be new to athletics entirely, an exam that you're getting ready for, you're sitting in the exam and it's not going well. Have you ever thought about a way to talk yourself through that moment? And what does that look like? So you start talking about them right away. And a lot of times people don't think about it. And then once you say it, they're like, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way. And I give people the opportunity, especially freshmen, when they come in, you don't know what you don't know, but after I educate you, you do know. So don't make the mistake, because now you know.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points on kind of how we do that, and kind of moving in towards some of the different training aspects. You have in-season and out of season training. You talked about synchronized swimming and rowing are consistently kind of always training, whether it's in-season, out of season. Dance is kind of the same way. Can you talk a little bit about what your weight room looks like during in-season training? And then we'll get into the out-of-season training as well.
Sure. So in season, it really depends on the sport. So some teams go down to only lifting twice a week, but a lot of that can come down to travel. So women's golf, when they're in season, they could probably train more than most. They could withstand more physically than most. But because of their travel schedule, when we start playing tournaments in February, well, obviously we're not playing in the Midwest. You have to go all the way out to California, or you're going down to Florida, someplace like that. So you've got that travel time that you're factoring in. So you lose the opportunity to train on those days. So you're more than likely going down to 2 days a week, where in the off season, you're training 3. You may have to pack more into those 2 days. So as women's golf, as we get closer We were looking at the course that we would have played for NCAAs this year is extremely hilly and it's got a lot of yardage to it. So the golf coach went out in the fall, walked the course, and it was 25,000 steps for her. So we knew that we were going to have to throw some cardio into some conditioning into the program with the lifting in order to get us through for when we got to NCAAs. With dance, we actually dial back some as we get closer to nationals because they are spending so much time in the dance studio and doing repetition after repetition after repetition. So then it becomes nationals is normally Martin Luther King weekend. So when we come back from Christmas break, those 2 weeks that I have them prior to nationals are what we call a flush and floss. So they're spending 20 minutes on the bike, flushing out their legs, flushing out their bodies. And then we're spending that extra time with the band, stretching, you know, getting things worked out and doing more recovery. With rowing, again, depending on our travel schedule, we might be lifting 2 days a week. We might be lifting 3. This year, we were going with 2 days, and then the middle of the week we used for recovery. So we were taking the team through foam rolling and stretching and different kind of rehab exercises to kind of just keep everybody up and moving and hopefully prevent some of those injuries. And the same with synchronized swimming. We go 3 days a week up until usually the week prior to nationals for us. And then they compete. And because of where their competition, their national season lies, once they're done, that's it for them for the year. So nationals would have been March 26, 27, 28 for us. When we came back, they would have been done then for the rest of the year.
When you're having in-season sports, like how do you maximize your time with your athletes? Like I know a lot of the coaches that are listening have long seasons. So how do they maximize their time with their athletes when they don't necessarily have a lot of that like one-on-one time, or kind of like in the weight room in the winter? We spend a lot of time with you in the winter. How can you maximize your time once you go into season?
A lot of that is, you know, what are you seeing in practice? You know, I need you to communicate with me what you're seeing in practice. And if that's not coming from the coaches, if you have strong leadership that you trust, you know, you go to them and go, okay, I'm reading body language right now, and I'm not getting a lot of positives back. What happened in practice today? Was it a good row? Was it a bad row? Was it a bad practice? Was it a bad practice because physically we weren't matching up, or was it a bad practice because mentally we just weren't there? Is it finals week? Is it midterms week? I mean, you have to look at all of those factors in some outlying things. So we came back in January and women's golf went out again, that MLK, Martin Luther King weekend. They went to California and played. They practiced. When they came back the next week, their legs were trashed. Well, why is that? Well, we just come off Christmas break. You know, the work, as everybody knows, when you go away from your team, you might be working, but you're still not working to the same level that you would if you were all together. And they came back and they played, you know, like 72 holes of golf in like 3 days. And they were fried because their bodies weren't ready for it. So then that changes the look of what the lift is going to be. Now we're going to look at more recovery than we are trying to get stronger.
That's great. And I think that moving into kind of the off-season segment of training, that's when you have a lot of time with your athletes. You can really put on the weight. You can really do a lot of great things in off-seasons. A lot of people say great teams are made in their off-season. So what does that look like in your weight room?
What that looks like in the weight room for most teams is more lifting sessions. Even with more sessions, more days a week, we still normally keep it to an hour. But it is pushing harder. It's adding reps, it's adding sets, it's adding more weight. It's a more progressive progression, your more intense progression than when you're in season. In season, you're dialing it back and you're trying to maintain all the strength that you've built up to that point and go more, like I said, into recovery to keep them going so they can see the end of the season. And it is too, is you're looking at technique. I mean, the off season is a great time to get everybody's technique down and do a lot of teaching to get ready for then when we ramp up into preseason.
I think that's also kind of a great segue into a lot of these high school coaches that are on here and that we're working with don't have the luxury of having strength and conditioning programs. They're kind of doing it themselves. What do you have to say for them? Like, how can they, like, they're not going to be able to implement a program just like Ohio State, but what can they implement?
You can implement anything that you have facilities for. I'm very passionate about this because I believe in a high school multi-sport athlete. In that for that to take place, the coaches need to be talking to each other. The student athlete needs to be honest with the coaches and say, hey, you know, I'm playing 2 sports or I'm playing 3 sports. And so whatever sport you're in season for, that's what you should be training. Instead of, hey, I play football in the fall, so I'm going to lift football during wrestling season and during lacrosse season. Everybody's got to share and kind of be nice because the core lifts might be the same, but there are definitely some things that are specific to each sport that need to be worked on. But for high school coaches, if you don't have a strength coach, I would tell you to keep it simple. Don't try to get crazy. Don't try to do exercises that put your athletes at risk because you're not qualified to coach them or you don't have the equipment to coach them safely. So nobody should be doing heavy squats if you don't have safeties for your racks or if you don't have a rack. That's playing with fire. No good is going to come out of that. And now is a great time to learn to be creative. I have become extremely creative over the last month in sending out workouts. As you have, you know, some of your athletes might have access to a rack or dumbbells or kettlebells or whatever. And then you have some athletes that have access to nothing. So, you know, you're shooting videos of, okay, how do you squat holding a bag of mulch or, you know, doing a deadlift with a bag of sand or loading up your backpack and squatting with that or filling up your milk jugs and doing front raises. So creativity is a wonderful thing. And you know, it's funny, there's also a quote that if you fight hard enough for your excuses, you get to keep them. Well, not having proper weights is not an excuse for not working out. And I would also tell high school coaches, try to go to clinics, try to talk to people, you know, try to reach out to different schools that do have strength coaches that are willing to talk to you. But I would say, you know, whoever you're talking to, make sure that they're certified in strength and conditioning. And you're going to see that with either a CSCS certification or a CSCCA. And that way, you know that that person's gone the extra mile and they are certified in strength and conditioning. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube and there's a lot of stuff on YouTube.
Yeah, I think those are all really great notes. And I think if you're a young coach or a high school coach, definitely a lot that you can take from that and being able to move your teams forward and become a better team. And kind of on that note, moving forward to championship teams. So this week we've had an amazing lineup of coaches that we've added you to as well. And so we've had the opportunity to talk to everyone about what makes up a championship team. So first off, when you look at the championship teams that you've had, whether it's Big Ten champions or national champions, what do those teams look like? Like, what do they feel like? What do they look like whenever you see them?
They can't be egocentric. So before we started, you and I were talking about Katie Smith. So Katie Smith was a freshman my first year at Ohio State when we played for the national championship in women's basketball. We had a strong senior class, but Katie set the tone and she led the rest of the team as a freshman because the upperclassmen were willing to let that happen. Because it was for the betterment of the team in order for them to win and play for a national championship. And that's what happened. So you also have to have a group. I had a bunch a couple years ago in a sport that they were just a bunch of really nice girls. And I had a conversation with them and I said, listen, you're all really nice people. That's not going to help us. One of you needs to be the porcupine. You've got to have that one person who's willing to step up and say things to people that they don't want to hear. But people also have to understand that you get away with doing that when people know that you care about them and they have your best interest at heart. That's the only way that works. And especially with females, you have to be a little bit careful with that, and you have to coach them to be open and say, hey, your teammate is not being bossy with you. The goal is to win. And in order to win, we have to make these adjustments. And sometimes you have teams that have leaders. Sometimes you have to cultivate leaders. And sometimes you don't have leaders at all. And if you don't have leaders, those teams aren't going to be successful.
So when looking at your really successful teams and those core leadership groups, whether they're team captains or leadership teams or councils, whatever your team had called them, what traits and behaviors did those leaders specifically have that not only they brought in their weight room, but they brought into their practice arenas as well as out to the games and even just in everyday life? Like, what traits and behaviors did they have that allowed them to lead championship teams?
It's interesting because you have some leaders that walk the walk, you have some leaders that talk the talk, and you have some leaders that do both. And it's just a matter of, and sometimes people can lead, but they're not exactly good at their sport. So we've had times where somebody's come in and they're great in the weight room. I'll use the word strong, but I don't mean physically strong, their personality is strong. And they're driving the rest of the team or their group to get through the workout. And they're doing that through, their words and their walk and what they're getting done in there. And again, in reinforcing of, listen, we all have the same goal. Our goal is to win. In order to win, we have to do this, this, and this. And I will make a commitment to you that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get that done for all of us, not just me, but for all of us. And as a leader, once you make that commitment to your team, you better uphold it in every part of your life, because if you step out of that, you lose credibility, and then that's it. They're not going to let you back in.
Yeah, I think that's a really important note, especially because high schools tend to pick their leaders based on who they think is the best athlete and most popular or whatever it might be. But I think you lean more towards colleges, look for trying to pick the best athlete that's going to be the best leader. So they might not be the best athlete, but the best leader. And I think you see that a lot in the weight room. Do you have any thoughts on that?
For high schools, sometimes, well, I know a lot of times it becomes a popularity contest, of who we think is the best player. Being the best player doesn't exactly make you the best leader. And maybe in those situations, guiding those young people with, okay, you're going to choose your captains, and here are the criteria for captain, and give them a list, because again, we make that assumption that they know. Well, they don't know what they don't know. They just know that so-and-so is their friend, and, they've grown up together and he's played football for a really long time. So I think he'd be a great captain. That's not necessarily the case. So again, you go back to who do you admire? What does their work ethic look like? What are their words? Where's their positivity? Where's their negativity? And what are they willing to do to make the team better? And in the weight room, I tell you guys all the time, everybody gets to have a bad day, but not everybody can have the same bad day, because there has to be somebody left to lift everybody up. And those are the people that you look for. So there are going to be days rowing more often than not, coming straight off the water, where it's just been lots of loops, lots of volume, lots of sadness. And there's got to be that one person to go, okay, that was rough. That was rough. But coming into the weight room, it's a fresh start. It's a different part of our day, and we can reset ourselves and we can be successful in here, even though practice might not have gone as planned. So you've got to have that person that can compartmentalize and help people move on to the next thing. Yeah, Did that suck? It totally did, but we're not going to embrace it. We're going to move through it and look at our next opportunity to get better.
Yeah, I think that's great. Kind of leading into our next question of you've coached a lot of championship teams, some national championships, Big Ten championships that we spoke to. I know you have so many rings that you stopped having rings made. What does it take to get to the top, and how do you stay at the top?
To get to the top, you have to have a group of athletes who are willing to sell out. I know I keep repeating myself, do whatever it takes. That's what it takes. You have to do whatever it takes. So, for high school, okay, great. You had practice, you practice 5 days a week. What are you doing on the weekend? If there's not a game or a competition on the weekend, what are you doing on the weekend? Are you taking those 2 days off? Or are you looking at what your weaknesses are, and are you trying to make yourself better? Whether that be off the scouting report, off of film, whatever that looks like, what are you doing based on what you learned the past week from your weaknesses to get you better, to work past that next point? And being successful doesn't have a time limit. Again, practice might be, let's say practice is from high school is after school. Practice is from 4 to 6 p.m. Awesome. Okay, great. That was practice. But if you go to golf and your round didn't go well, my practice time's done. But your putting and your chipping is not great. So are you willing to spend that extra time to work on that and wait for that? Okay, finally, I hit the ball the way that I want it to end on a success. Or are you just being bound by time limits? Well, this is the time that was set for my practice, so that's all I'm going to practice. You can't be successful that way. You look at rowing. Rowing, the amount of optional practices and hours. That's what it takes to be the best. Synchronized swimming. So many of our ladies come from the West Coast and are fortunate enough to have pools in their backyard. You can bet that they're in the pool right now. They're doing different hybrids. They're doing different things. The dancers, a lot of them have a studio in their basement. So they're working on those things. So even though there's downtime, they're still practicing their craft. And once you get that work ingrained into an athlete, then they crave it. So when we entered into this uncertain time with the pandemic, that's the first thing athletes are asking is, okay, well, I don't have an erg. I can't be on the water. I can't go to the golf course. I can't, but what can I? Well, we can work out, we can putt in the backyard. We can do different things. So you keep pushing and you keep looking at ways to get better, and you identify what the weakness is in your game. And that's the thing that you focus on. And after you get that win, you don't rest on that. You keep looking at ways to get better. For rowing, 3 national championships in a row didn't come from us continuing to do the same thing. We had to continue to reach, we had to continue to grow. And so, you just can't settle. You have to be willing to do more. If you're only going to do what's asked of you, it's not going to be good enough to win a championship, because people who want it go extra.
Yeah, and I think that when we're talking about going extra and having this standard of excellence, if you're, teaching young athletes, say like middle schoolers or even younger than that, and high schoolers, how do you push them to always have a standard of excellence? I grew up in a household that the standard was always excellence. So that was kind of ingrained into me going into college, but not everybody has that. And sometimes the coach is the person who has to ingrain that into their athletes. So how do you push your athletes to be excellence and have the championship mindset that we're looking for?
First, you ask them, what do you want? Well, I want to win a championship. Oh, good for you. What are you willing to do to get it? What are you willing to do to get it? And if you go, back to a golfer, okay, you say you want to play professional golf when you're done. Okay, cool. How's that going to happen? Who's the professional golfer that you're following? How much that person is practicing? What kind of time they're putting into their game? What that looks like? And especially for young people like middle schoolers and stuff like that, they 100% have role models for their sport. They have people that they're looking at because that's why I want to be that person. I want to, well, have you looked at what that person has done to be successful? Okay, now that you've looked at that, tell me again what you want and what you're willing to do to get it. Because sometimes they know what they want, but they don't understand the amount of work that it's going to take to get there. And it's not just, doing your practice. There might be agilities involved. There might be, lifting involved. There might be, shooting involved. There's a lot of different things that you've got to be willing to do. You can't just do the minimum. So now, again, tell me what your goal is and what you're willing to do to get that goal. And after we've talked about it, now I want you to write it down. Because a goal is just a dream until you put it on paper.
Yeah, and we're kind of talking about having people step up to be excellence and those kind of things of what you just hit on. How do you incorporate leaders into your weight room to set that standard for you?
You look at the people that, when we transition from practice into the weight room, okay, where are your leaders? We got to go. We got to get set up for our warm up. It's this amount of time. You move your group. You're responsible for your group and what they're doing overall. And what does that look like? Because, when rowing comes in the weight room, if we're rolling full force on varsity, that's 45 people. You've got 45 people in there, 2 full-time strength coaches and 2 student interns. Well, four people aren't going to have eyes on 45. So you need to be responsible for what's going on either side of you. And if you see something or somebody that's not pushing, you call them out. What's going on? I'm really tired. You know what? I'm really tired too. But in order to get better, we're going to have to push a little bit harder. And I know that you've got this. So you ask your leaders to step up. We're working in partners or asking your partners to communicate with each other going, listen, I know that set wasn't heavy enough for you. You can do more weight safely. Or coming to us and saying, hey, you know what? So-and-so, tweak something during practice. She's not saying anything, but I'm not sure that she should be lifting, as much weight as what's on her card. So it actually goes both ways. You're pushing those people to be better than they think they can. And at the same time, you're identifying and you're being honest with your coach about limitations that you might think that person has based on what happened in practice that the strength coach doesn't know about.
We talk a lot at Titan about small unit cohesion and building these small teams. And I can remember whenever you'd pull us into practice, you'd always call team captains heads of households because you were in charge of that group. That was your family while you were in the weight room, really kind of at all times. Those were the 10 girls you were in charge of as a team leader. How do you use those small units? I know you kind of just touched on that, but how do you really use those small units in your weight room?
Those are your communicators. Those are your go-tos. Those are your trusts that, like I said earlier, when you're reading that body language before they come in the weight room, you're bringing your HOHs in and saying, okay, talk to me about what's going on right now. This is what I'm seeing. Help me with what you think we need. Should I cut some sets off? Do we need to take a different approach? Do we need to take a different tone today? What are your thoughts? And, those are the people that you trust, because at the end of the day, it's your team. It's not my team. It's your team. And I'm here to, strength coaches are called support staff. We are here to support the sport coach and the team. And at the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to do, is support you. So I'm going to trust you to give me the information that I need to make the right call for the team as we move forward. And it's a big trust factor. It's a big trust factor. And if you have good leadership, they're going to come back with something equitable. So years ago, when we were able to negatively reinforce people, if they came late or whatever that looked like, I had an athlete on the dance team that showed up late. So I brought the HOHs together and I'm like, here's the situation. This is what I have in mind. She was like 15 minutes late and I was going to have her wall sit. And I said, this is what I'm thinking, or you can come back to me with, a different scenario. And they took a couple minutes and they came back, and it was a freshman that screwed up, and they came back to me with a different scenario. And they're like, Coach, can we break the 15 minutes down by class? Can we share it? I'm like, sure, absolutely. And with that, once that happened, the freshman came to me and she said, can I take it on my own? And I'm like, no, because your leaders have decided that the team is going to take it and help you with it.
Yeah, and I think that's an amazing story and kind of speaks to the attitude that you've always had in the weight room with all of us. As we wrap up here, again, thank you for joining us tonight. Do you have any final thoughts on any of the leadership or anything like that?
Leadership's hard. Leadership's hard. Leadership sometimes makes you unpopular, but is it worth it? Yeah, but always, if you want to be a good leader, you have to lead from a good place. And that good place is, I am pushing you for your benefit, not for mine.
Yeah, thank you again, Coach Steve, for joining us. I think everybody took a lot out of this, whether you're a high school coach, you're a college coach, or an athlete listening, of how we can get better each and every day, whether it's using our weight room, having mental toughness, and really taking advantage of our leaders and making them grow and become better for each of our team. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., we're going to have Chuck Martin on, the coach down in Miami, University of Ohio. Should be another great talk from another champion. So thank you again for joining us, Coach. Thank you for checking out Titan Leader. Be sure to continue to check in on the app for more leadership content. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.